Hey there, and welcome back to another Dragon Prince video. And recently, as I'm sure you're well aware, we saw the release of the latest season of The Dragon Prince on Netflix with the release of Book 4, Earth, just earlier in November. And this had to be one of the most eagerly awaited animated releases of the year. Book 3 had come out years before, and when it was being made, there was that air of uncertainty. I'm not sure if it had been renewed for a fourth season during production, so already there was going to have to be some delays. Top that off with a global pandemic that ground the world to a halt for the best part of a year, and working from home, and yeah, you have a recipe for a 3-year delay. And so began the long winter. A winter where the hype and interest of the fandom slowly went into hibernation. And during this long delay, I started to come around to the idea that the fandom might have just straight up died and moved on elsewhere. But yeah, I was wrong. Because as soon as any scrap of news would come out, there'd be a flurry of excitement before everybody scuttled back to their burrows once again. Until this year's fateful Comic-Con, where the fandom was awakened, and awakened with a vengeance, with the hype rocketing off the charts. There were so many key plot points that people were excited for. Rayla and Callum, Viren coming back to life, Claudia and her new boyfriend, Ezran being king and seeing what that would look like, Erebos and what's going on with him, what are his plans and goals, what's Zim doing, what's his mum doing, how's Zadia, the elves, their newfound alliance with the humans. There were so many lingering plot threads to address, not to mention Rayla's absence over the course of the time skip that was, admittedly, quite annoyingly set up in a book. Like, why? Why do this? I guarantee the same amount of people bought the book as they would have done if you didn't have a game-changing plot twist that directly ties into the story being told on screen. But yeah, I've made my feelings clear on that before. Let's try not to get sidetracked here. There was obviously a lot for the season to address, and the hype was real. It was intense. It might not have been the biggest fandom of all time, but it was certainly growing and growing, and so that hype just ballooned more and more as we approached that fateful release date. And yeah, it released, and the response was mixed, to say the least. There have been some major complaints directed towards the season. For reference, Season 1 of Dragon Prince has a 91% Rotten Tomatoes score, Season 2 has a 94%, Season 3 is 93%, and then Season 4, as of writing this, was sitting on 65%, which, well, yeah, that's a massive drop-off. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad score, and I'm sure it might even out in the future. But at the same time, when you look at it as one part of a whole, it is a bad sign that you have these 3 major scores in a row, and then the reception drops off massively. Close to a 30% decrease in approval is a huge shift. And whilst it's clearly not going to kill the show or anything ridiculous like that, it really can't feel all that nice for the creators, and would be something you'd assume they'd want to address. Most people want to make content that's well received. Nobody wants to be known as only okay, or mediocre, or worse, past their best, because that's an acknowledgement that you were once good, and have now fallen into a rut. And there's really nothing worse than that. And of course, the complaints do vary, but there are a few common elements that I have seen throughout the fandom. The biggest of these is perhaps the shift in tone. Prior seasons, whilst clearly skewing towards a younger audience, like the majority of shows in this genre, had an undercurrent of maturity that many in the fandom felt was lacking from the latest season. And on top of that, the animation wasn't as good, especially the lighting, the voice acting felt lacking, character arcs felt half-baked, with some feeling rushed or abnormally slow, and some feeling forced. There were questions about the pacing, and how nothing really seemed to happen at all, how the dialogue was poorly written, or how there were whole storylines that just oozed filler, and really didn't need to be there to begin with. And honestly, the whole Sun Elf political strife storyline came to mind for that complaint. So yeah, it's safe to say there were a whole lot of complaints. And of course, that's not to say that nobody liked the season. Look on any social media site and you'll see many posts or comments defending the season. It's not that bad, the humour isn't any different, it's a setup season, they're supposed to be slow, those sort of things. And look, I don't think any one group is 100% wrong in their opinion. I sit somewhere in the middle, as per usual, sitting on that fence. So, on the one hand, as per usual when it comes to a show that releases something that isn't up to the standards that it previously was, you have those doubters. People think that it's all going to shit and the writing is god-awful now. Nothing redeeming in the season whatsoever, and it's on the verge of getting cancelled. It's so terrible. Now, obviously that's a little bit exaggerated, but that isn't that far from the hysteria that can sometimes get whipped up, and I have seen a few of these baffling takes floating around in the last little while since the season came out. And yeah, these takes, they're more than a little ridiculous. I can't see how one mixed response to a season is going to kill a show, especially when what matters most is the viewership, which I'd assume had to be high, based on all the reactions I've seen, and that huge groundswell of hype and anticipation in the lead up to the release. So no, the show isn't dying. And yet on the other hand, it's also not hard to see that for me, this thing lacks a lot of polish in pretty much every way imaginable. Scripting, acting, animation. It just didn't live up to that previously set standard. And at first I thought, that's fine. After all, I think I can forgive it a little bit. This thing suffered through the pandemic. And from what I understand, there was a lot of working from home, including the recording of the voice artists. I understand it would be a bit harder to direct in those circumstances, act in those circumstances, and obviously harder to use the right tools to give that visual polish. I can accept that for the most part. The only thing that I think really deserved its complete and utter critique was the overall script and narrative flow. But I've covered that in depth in previous videos, but yeah, I figured, okay, when they make the next season, since conditions have improved, the animation quality and the acting performances should be better, right? I think at minimum, we can expect that. And on top of that, generally, a creator's going to take on constructive critiques. So, if the writing was less well received, maybe things would be shaken up a little bit. And I'm not talking about changing overarching storylines. That would be a bit ridiculous. Those are probably already set in stone. And honestly, changing course on the fly based on fan perceptions sounds like a recipe for disaster no matter what way you slice it. But the finer details, the dialogue, character interactions, jokes, I think those are things you can change, and I think that would help a lot. I mean, everybody talks about Avatar when they talk about this show, and it feels like it's beating a dead horse at this point, but I just feel like it's become the yardstick by which so much animation's measured. And a lot of what makes that show so fun and exciting, and what makes it one of the all-time greats, is those little moments, even beyond those main plot points. The little moments are fun and enjoyable and engaging for the audience. And so, with this added time and the response to the writing of the latest season, you'd expect that even if the quality isn't quite at the standard of the first 3 seasons, that it would still improve, right? And so this is what's already got me very worried, because recently I've seen discussions that not only is the 5th season written, but it's been recorded already. And this has me a bit nervous to say the least, because, well, I didn't think that season 4 was a disaster by any means, but at the same time, I figured at best the scripts were being written for season 5. And thus, if there were things that needed tinkering based on the response of the audience, they could be tinkered with and changed. Nothing major, but like I said, the smaller details, the character moments, the dialogue, these are the kind of things you could change up. And you'd be surprised how much that would change things, how it would make things better. But the fact is that it seems like it's already been announced to be finished based on interviews that I've seen. And that to me bodes ill, because it suggests that the season will likely continue to go in a pretty similar direction as this one, and I think that's much less than ideal, because there are many things that need work going forward. Callum feeling like less of a bystander, fixing whatever the hell they've decided to do with the main romantic arc, improving the tone of the villain scenes and not having them cram in a joke every other sentence, giving character dialogue a bit more depth. The way in which characters interact and speak should directly correspond to who they're talking to, but the majority of the time it feels like nothing changes. Whether it's a discussion between brothers, ex-girlfriends and boyfriends, friends, counselors, servants, it feels like any line from any character delivered to any other character could have been delivered by anybody in the story. Nothing felt specific, and so characterization was very lacking. And so I'm nervous that not only is it going to be more of the same, but it has the potential to become worse and move from to actively bad. And so there's not really much more to say, other than these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of the future of Dragon Prince? Are you worried like me? Or are you a bit more optimistic? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and let me know.